Shams reported the other day that the Grizzlies are open to trading him. And why is that? Um, it's because, there's this little bit of an awkwardness with Ja Morant. His value is pretty complicated. Um, First of all, his availability, right? He's never on the floor these days. He's injured. He, takes games off sometimes. He has this calf issue right now that he's dealing with, and we all know that calf issues lead directly to Achilles, and that puts you out for pretty much the entire season, right? And there's a increase in Achilles, it feels like, or Achilles tears for that matter, over the last couple of years with the pace of play and just the athleticism of some of these guys in the NBA, right? As a whole, the NBA has gotten really athletic. Even centers. You look at Wemby, right? No center was doing stuff that Wemby was doing back in the day. And, Wemby is definitely an outlier, but there are players like Jokic, like Şengün, players that are, in between a guy like Wemby and some of the guys in the 80s and 90s and even the 2000s in terms of athleticism. Right? His production, Ja Morant, has gone, extremely downhill this season. I think it's probably his worst season of his career. The efficiency's down, the rim pressure is declining, right? He's not getting to the rim as often. He's not dunking the ball as often, and that's a big problem because, he's playing scared, right? And you don't want a player that is playing scared on the court. He's worried about getting injured again, and that's a concern for sure. But with that concern comes the fact that he's just standing out on the court and being a liability on the offensive end for you. Right? And to be honest, he's just not fun to watch, right? You look at a guy like Anthony Edwards compared to Ja Morant here, and they're pretty similar players in my opinion. But Anthony Edwards is leading a top team in the Western Conference. Meanwhile, Ja is sitting on the bench for a team that is under 500, and when he's on the court, he is a shell of himself, right? And then I'm going to get more into the team results in just a second, but I want to take a step back and, look at what's coming up for him, or I guess the team, right? The team is heading to Europe. This is why it's very confusing why they, they reported this now, or they, the Grizzlies, let the rumors seek out that they're open to trading him, because they're heading to Europe for a showcase game in Berlin, and then I think they head to London afterwards. And the NBA is trying to build a reputation, build a fan base in Europe, and you're putting a guy out there in Ja Morant, who's the star of this matchup, right, the headline for these matchups, as a way to promote the league. And the guy that you're promoting or using to promote is a guy that barely even plays. And when he does play, he's not good. And so I'm really confused on why the Grizzlies would do that, because not only is this going to hurt the NBA's reputation, which, who knows, if he shines and he performs in those games, it'll be fine. But overall, right, you don't want him going out there and, it's one thing if he doesn't have a great game, but it's another thing if he doesn't even play, or, the team plays bad and there's a bad mood around the team. You don't want that, because, he's going to be doing media, availability, of course, before the game. That's the NBA is going to force him to do that with just a way to promote the league, and there's going to be questions about his long-term status in the NBA, as well as, or not with this team, long-term status with this team, as well as questions about playing in Europe and whatever like that. There'll be the fan base questions, but there'll also be the serious NBA questions, and he's going to have to deal with that while, trying to promote the league at the same time, and that's a hard task to do, right? Especially, right, when the NBA is trying to promote that international business, and he has a shoe obligation with Nike, stuff that you don't want to get in the way of his production, but at the moment, with all the stuff he has going for him, he has all these things off the court that are also not helping his case. And as for the team, they're 6-12 when he plays, and just about 500 when he doesn't play, right? So it's not like they're a great team without him. The upside of Ja is obviously going to be better than maybe the floor is higher with him off the court, but definitely the ceiling's higher with him on the court. And at the moment, or at least this season and over the last couple of seasons, when he's played, he just has not looked great. We talked about his efficiency. He's shooting a career, low for 3-point shooting, and he's taking, threes like he's a natural 3-point shooter. Like that's his thing that he does. He's, chucking up, 4, 5, 6, 7 sometimes threes a game, and shooting at such a low volume or shooting at such a low efficiency here that it's just, just hurting the team in every which way. Jump shooting as well, right? He's, he used to be a guy that, had the obviously the, the highlight worthy dunks and whatever, and, posterizers. And then you'd also have, his ability to shoot mid-range and fade away contested twos. And you're just getting none of that right now. And he's very similar to a guy like, Trae Young, like Luka Doncic to a lesser degree, because Luka obviously has a much higher offensive ceiling. But LaMelo Ball is in that same category. These guys that, have great offensive potential, sometimes struggle on the defensive end in the case of LaMelo Ball and Trae Young, and a little bit of Luka, although it's been a little bit better as of this season. But, guys that really struggle on the defensive end, hurt teams, but then have such a high offensive potential that you're sort of conflicted on whether you want to play him or you don't. And we know what the Hawks did. We're going to get to that. They moved on from him, or from Trae Young. And the Grizzlies are sort of in that same boat. Plus, they have the other, social side of that, right? The fact that, he has been suspended for 25 games or whatever it was for the gun incident. He, the second he came back, he tore his shoulder and was out, right? So you have the injury concerns compiled with the mental side of it and the social side, the fact that you don't want to have that sort of lingering over your team. And these two things make it very hard to keep a player like that, despite his potential offensive production, even if he can get it around in years to come, right? And the problem is that, when I say it sort of feels like a distressed asset, right? The fact that, we compare him to Trae Young, and we saw the market that Trae Young got, there's a very little market for, offensive-only guys, because this league values athleticism, two-way status as a player, and just basically, above all, the ability to not be a just disaster on the defensive end, because it doesn't matter how good your offense is. If you are being just attacked every single time down the court on defense, they're counterproductive there. You need, all defensive players have a little bit of offense in them that you can get whenever you want. And offense obviously is the hardest, part to master, or I guess the hardest skills to, to master, right? And, players that are natural born scorers, get paid the most in this league. That's just how it works. Because, offensive players like that are so hard to come by. But that being said, the players that are making the difference on teams are the two-way players, the two-way role players or star players, right? You look at Jaylen Brown, yes, they've struggled, the Celtics, and we're not going to make this about the Celtics, but they have struggled as of recently a little bit, but for the most part, they've been so good this season because of the two-way ability of Jaylen Brown, Derek White, whoever's on the court, right? Shea is still a fantastic defensive player. He's not even the best defensive player on that team. But he's not a complete liability on that end of the floor, right? And I think another fact is few teams need a point guard like that. Of these teams that can absorb $40 million in salary cap, even fewer of those, have the ability, or of those teams that can take on 40 million, fewer of those teams, want a guy like that or have that need for a point guard, right? And with today's salary cap, rules, very few teams will just take on a $40 million contract and see what happens. You have to be so sure that it's going to work out for the future of your team, and the path and direction you want to take as a franchise, right? And does Memphis have to trade him? I think so. I think that the feeling is pretty mutual. Ja Morant wants a new situation, a new culture that he can be a part of. Same with the Grizzlies. The locker room is in dysfunction. We'll see what happens on this Europe trip. It could be a success on the outside for the NBA, but inside, the team could be just in complete shambles. We'll see what happens. And the longer they keep the longer they keep a hold of him, he is going to, if his production continues to stay like it is, the smaller and smaller his potential returnings could be. And the Grizzlies do want to start over and build around a young core in Triple J, and they got rid of Desmond Bane this summer, but they want to keep a hold of Edie and some of their young talent that they have right now. And I'm gonna move on to the Trae Young trade. I think both these players are two players that we saw what the Hawks got back for Trae Young, right? Just a couple picks or a couple players on pretty poor salaries compared to their production. They got very few picks. I don't think the Hawks got any picks, actually, if I'm not mistaken, right? So, and I believe actually that the Grizzlies are going to get less than that, because I think in the end, Trae Young's actually a better player than Ja Morant is at this stage.